A long, narrow valley cuts across the Appalachian landscape with a precision that raises more questions than it answers. Why does this corridor stretch so cleanly across rugged terrain that otherwise resists uniformity? How does a feature more than 120 miles, or about 200 kilometers in length, maintain such consistent form across multiple states? And why does a structure tied to deep geologic forces leave so little visible trace at the surface? Across parts of Tennessee and Alabama, approaching the northwestern edge of Georgia, the Sequatchie Valley extends as a distinct, elongated depression that appears almost engineered in its geometry. It measures slightly more than 4 miles, or about 7 kilometers, in width for much of its length, maintaining a narrow profile while stretching from near Wartburg, Tennessee, down toward Dora, Alabama. The city of Chattanooga provides a familiar geographic anchor near its southern reach, though the valley itself does not conform to political boundaries. Instead, it cuts across them with indifference, guided by forces far older than any mapped line. At first glance, the valley might be mistaken for a simple erosional feature shaped by rivers over time. Streams and tributaries do occupy the valley floor, weaving through sediment and feeding into larger drainage systems, yet the scale and linear continuity of the valley suggest a deeper structural influence. Digital elevation models reveal a pronounced trough, bordered by elevated plateaus, with steep escarpments marking transitions between high and low terrain. These escarpments are not random. They follow a pattern that hints at an underlying geologic framework. Running along much of the valley's western margin is a fault identified in geological surveys as a thrust fault. In such a structure, layers of rock have been pushed up and over adjacent layers due to compressional forces. This type of deformation is characteristic of the ancient mountain building events that shaped the Appalachian region hundreds of millions of years ago. During that time, immense pressure within the Earth's crust forced sedimentary layers to fold, fracture, and shift along faults, creating a complex arrangement of structures buried beneath the surface. Despite its significance, the fault associated with the Sequatchie Valley is not immediately obvious when viewed in the landscape. There are no sharp breaks or visible displacements comparable to those seen in tectonically active regions. Instead, the terrain appears relatively subdued, with rolling plateaus and deeply incised gorges dominating the surroundings. The absence of dramatic surface expression reflects the fault's age. It has not experienced substantial movement in recent geological time, and the processes that once defined it have long since given way to erosion. The valley's existence is closely tied to the concept of a fault ramp, a structural feature formed when rock layers are pushed up along a sloping fault plane. As these layers move, they bend, creating a broad fold in the overlying strata. In the case of the Sequatchie Valley, this folding produced an uplifted region composed of sedimentary rocks resting atop older metamorphic and igneous basement formations. The uplift did not remain intact. Over millions of years, exposure to weathering and erosion gradually wore down the elevated structure. Erosion does not act uniformly across different types of rock. Some layers resist breakdown due to their composition and cementation, while others are more susceptible to chemical and physical weathering. In this region, more resistant rocks initially formed the outer shell of the fold, protecting softer layers beneath. As time progressed, streams and rivers began to cut through the resistant layers, exploiting fractures and weaknesses. Once the protective cap was breached, the underlying softer materials were exposed to accelerated erosion. This process led to a reversal of topography. Areas that were once elevated became low-lying as the core of the fold was carved away. The valley that exists today represents the eroded interior of what was once a raised geologic structure. This outcome may appear counterintuitive, yet it is a well-documented phenomenon in regions where differential erosion interacts with folded rock layers. The surrounding plateaus provide additional context. On either side of the valley, elevated terrain persists. composed of more resistant rock units that have withstood erosion more effectively. These plateaus are dissected by streams that have carved deep gorges, creating a rugged landscape that contrasts with the relatively smooth floor of the valley. The transition between plateau and valley is often abrupt, marked by steep slopes that reflect the boundary between differing rock types and structural conditions. In some sections, particularly toward the northeastern extent near Wartburg, the valley does not appear as continuous as it does farther southwest. Here, erosion has not fully exposed the weaker layers beneath the fold, leaving segments where the valley is interrupted by higher ground. These areas offer a glimpse into an earlier stage of landscape evolution, where the process of erosion is still working to reveal the full extent of the underlying structure. Near Crab Orchard, Tennessee, remnants of the original fold are preserved in the form of elongated ridges, sometimes described as whaleback features. These ridges consist of resistant rock layers that remain intact, arching gently across the landscape. Their presence indicates that the erosion responsible for carving the valley has not progressed uniformly along its entire length. Instead, it has advanced at varying rates depending on local conditions, including rock composition, drainage patterns, and climatic influences over geological time. The broader geological context of the region includes the East Tennessee Seismic Zone, an area known for measurable earthquake activity. This zone lies primarily to the north and east of the valley, and while it reflects ongoing adjustments within the Earth's crust, it does not align directly with the fault associated with the valley. Earthquakes are not concentrated along the valley's fault line, reinforcing the understanding that it is not currently active. Its role in shaping the landscape belongs to a much earlier chapter in geological history. Beneath the surface, the arrangement of rock layers tells a story of compression and displacement. Sedimentary sequences deposited in ancient seas were later buried, lithified, and subjected to tectonic forces during the formation of the Appalachian Mountains. These forces created a series of folds and faults that define the Valley and Ridge Province. The Sequatchie Valley is one manifestation of this structural complexity, its form dictated by the interplay between deformation and erosion. Estimates suggest that as much as 10,000 feet, or roughly 3 kilometers, of overlying rock has been removed from this region through erosion. This immense loss of material is supported by evidence such as exposed coal seams, which would have originally formed under significant burial. Their presence at or near the surface indicates that layers once covering them have been stripped away over vast spans of time. The valley's alignment reflects the orientation of the underlying structures. It trends from southwest to northeast, consistent with the general pattern of folds and faults in the Appalachian region. This alignment is not coincidental. It represents the directional imprint of the forces that shape the mountains, preserved even as the original topography has been largely erased. Hydrology also plays a role in maintaining the valley's form. Streams flowing through the valley continue to transport sediment, gradually modifying the landscape while adhering to the structural constraints imposed by the underlying geology. These waterways may shift their courses over time, but the overall configuration of the valley remains tied to the distribution of rock types and the legacy of ancient deformation. The absence of visible fault scarps or offsets does not diminish the importance of the fault. Instead, it underscores the distinction between active tectonic landscapes and those shaped primarily by long-term erosion. In regions where faults are still active, surface features often reflect recent movement. Here, the lack of such features points to a system that has been dormant for an extended period, its influence preserved indirectly through the shapes it helped create. Geophysical data, including subsurface imaging and structural mapping, continue to refine understanding of how the fault interacts with surrounding formations. These methods reveal the geometry of the fault plane, the extent of displacement, and the relationship between different rock units. While much has been established, the full complexity of the system remains an area of ongoing study, particularly in terms of how variations along the fault may have influenced the rate and pattern of erosion. The Sequatchie Valley stands as a clear example of how ancient tectonic structures can dictate modern landscapes without remaining visibly active. Its form is not the result of a single process, but rather the cumulative effect of deformation, uplift, and prolonged erosion acting over hundreds of millions of years. The valley's persistence across such a distance, maintaining its narrow width and linear orientation, reflects the enduring influence of the fault that helped shape it, even as direct evidence of that structure fades from view. The landscape surrounding the valley continues to evolve, albeit at a pace that is imperceptible on human timescales. Weathering processes break down rock at the surface, while streams carry away sediment, gradually altering the contours of the terrain. These processes will continue to modify the valley, potentially widening it or smoothing its boundaries, but the fundamental structure guiding its existence will remain embedded in the geology below. As mapping techniques and analytical tools improve, subtle variations within the valley become more apparent. Differences in elevation, slope, and rock exposure reveal a complex interplay of factors that have influenced its development. These variations provide insight into the sequence of events that transformed an uplifted fold into the elongated depression observed today, highlighting the intricate relationship between structure and surface processes. The valley's understated appearance conceals a history of immense geological change. Beneath its relatively gentle contours lies evidence of forces that once reshaped entire regions, compressing and displacing vast volumes of rock. The fact that such a history can result in a feature that appears so orderly and continuous adds to the sense of complexity associated with its origin. Further examination of sediment distribution within the valley floor offers additional clues. Deposits carried by streams accumulate over time, creating layers that record changes in climate, drainage patterns, and erosion rates. These sediments act as a secondary archive, complementing the structural information preserved in the bedrock. Together, they provide a more complete picture of how the valley has evolved from its initial formation to its present state. In areas where the valley intersects with resistant rock formations, localized features emerge that break the otherwise consistent profile. Narrow ridges, isolated hills, and variations in slope reflect the uneven progression of erosion. These features do not disrupt the overall continuity of the valley, but instead add detail to its form, illustrating the variability inherent in natural processes. Changes in climate over immense spans of time have played a decisive role in refining the form of the Sequatchie Valley, adding another layer of complexity to a structure initially defined by tectonic forces. Periods of warmer and wetter conditions accelerated chemical weathering, particularly in carbonate-rich rocks, such as limestone, which dissolve more readily in slightly acidic water. In contrast, colder and drier intervals slowed these processes but often enhanced physical weathering through freeze and thaw cycles. These alternating conditions did not reshape the valley all at once, but gradually modified its slopes, drainage, and sediment distribution in ways that are still evident. During wetter climatic phases, increased rainfall intensified streamflow across the region. Water, moving through fractures and bedding planes, exploited existing weaknesses in the rock, deepening channels and transporting greater volumes of sediment. Over time, these processes contributed to the widening of the valley floor, as material eroded from the sides was carried away and deposited downstream. The valley's relatively uniform width, slightly exceeding 4 miles or about 7 kilometers in many sections, reflects a long balance between lateral erosion and the resistance offered by surrounding rock units. In contrast, periods marked by reduced precipitation altered the dynamics of erosion. With less water available to transport sediment, streams became less effective at removing material, allowing debris to accumulate in certain areas. These fluctuations contributed to the layering of sediments within the valley, creating a stratified record of environmental conditions. Fine-grained deposits settled during calmer periods, while coarser materials were laid down during episodes of stronger flow. Together, these layers form a chronological archive that complements the structural story recorded in the bedrock. Drainage evolution within the valley further illustrates the interaction between structure and surface processes. Initially, watercourses may have followed paths dictated by the folded and faulted rock layers, aligning with zones of weakness. As erosion progressed and the landscape adjusted, some streams altered their courses, capturing neighboring drainage systems or abandoning previous channels. This process, known as stream capture, can reorganize entire networks, redirecting water flow and influencing where erosion is most active. The present-day drainage pattern within the Sequatchie Valley reflects this long history of adjustment. Streams generally flow along the length of the valley before eventually connecting to larger river systems beyond its boundaries. Their alignment with the valley's axis reinforces the influence of the underlying structure, even as surface processes continue to reshape their courses on smaller scales. The persistence of this alignment over such a distance underscores the strength of the geological controls established during the region's formation. Subsurface variations along the fault and associated fold introduce additional complexity. The fault does not maintain identical characteristics throughout its entire length. Differences in displacement, angle, and the types of rock involved can influence how the overlying layers respond to erosion. In areas where displacement was greater, the resulting fold may have been more pronounced, leading to thicker accumulations of weaker rock in the core. These sections would have been more susceptible to erosion, potentially explaining why some portions of the valley appear more developed than others. Conversely, where displacement was less significant, the fold may have been subtler, leaving less contrast between resistant and erodible layers. In such areas, erosion would proceed more slowly, preserving higher ground and creating interruptions in the otherwise continuous valley. These variations are not always immediately visible from the surface, but become apparent through detailed mapping and analysis of rock exposures. The role of lithology remains central to understanding the valley's evolution. Different sedimentary rocks respond differently to weathering and erosion. Sandstone, for example, tends to be more resistant due to its composition and cementation, often forming ridges or cliffs. Shale, composed of finer particles, breaks down more easily and is more likely to form slopes or low-lying areas. Limestone, while initially resistant, can be dissolved over time, especially in the presence of acidic water, leading to features such as sinkholes and underground drainage systems. Within the Sequatchie Valley, the interplay of these rock types has contributed to its distinct profile. Resistant layers along the margins help maintain the steep boundaries of the valley, while softer materials in the interior have been removed more efficiently. This contrast reinforces the valley's elongated shape, ensuring that erosion continues to act preferentially within its core rather than uniformly across the region. Karst processes associated with the dissolution of limestone may also play a role in localized areas of the valley. Underground channels can develop where water dissolves soluble rock, creating voids that may eventually collapse, forming depressions at the surface. While not the dominant process shaping the valley as a whole, such features add another dimension to the landscape, influencing drainage and sediment movement on smaller scales. The long-term removal of overlying rock, estimated at up to 10,000 feet, or roughly 3 kilometers, has had profound implications for the region's geology. As material was stripped away, pressure on the remaining rocks decreased, leading to gradual adjustments within the crust. This process, known as isostatic rebound, can cause the land to rise slightly over time, partially compensating for the loss of mass. Although subtle, such adjustments contribute to the ongoing evolution of the landscape. Evidence of the valley's deep geological past is preserved not only in its structure, but also in the resources it contains. Coal deposits exposed within the region indicate that organic rich materials were once buried under significant thicknesses of sediment. Their current position near the surface highlights the extent of erosion that has taken place. These deposits serve as markers of former conditions, offering insight into the environments that existed long before the valley assumed its present form. The alignment of the valley with the broader Appalachian structural trend reinforces its connection to regional tectonics. The southwest to northeast orientation mirrors the direction of compressional forces that shape the mountain belt. Even though the original mountains have been greatly reduced by erosion, their structural imprint remains evident in features such as the Sequatchie Valley. This continuity across scales, from individual folds to regional patterns, reflects the coherence of the processes that form the Appalachians. Modern analytical techniques continue to refine understanding of the valley's development. High-resolution topographic data allows for precise measurement of elevation changes, revealing subtle features that may not be visible in the field. Geophysical methods provide insight into the arrangement of rock layers below the surface, helping to reconstruct the geometry of the fault and associated structures. These tools do not alter the fundamental interpretation of the valley's origin, but enhance the level of detail with which it can be understood. If you found this deep dive into one of the most intriguing geological features in the Appalachian region informative and engaging, consider supporting the content. Like, share, and subscribe to stay updated on more explorations into Earth's hidden structures, and tap that hype icon to help this video reach a wider audience.